Welcome to Major Label Debut, the podcast about major label debuts. I'm Graham Wright. Have you ever dreamed about leaving it all behind? You know, ditching the rat race of modernity and starting a wholesome new life in the bucolic countryside. No more deluge of emails, no more choke of cars, no more anxiety rectangle buzzing in your pocket all day and night. Just rising with the sun, living off the land, feeding the chickens. That sounds pretty good right about now. It's a compelling dream, it always has been. But for most of us, it tends to stay a dream. Not for Vashti Bunyan. In 1967, at the age of 22, after a couple years trying to break into the music business as a pop singer in London, she found herself dissatisfied with all of it, with the whole scene. So, she quit her job. She got herself a horse and cart, yes, and set off to travel, again, by horse and cart in the late 1960s from London all the way up to the north of Scotland, which is pretty much the farthest way you can go from there. Fortunately for posterity, she brought her guitar. And along the road, she wrote a bunch of beautiful, incredible songs, the songs that would eventually make up her Phillips record debut, Just Another Diamond Day. In other words, she did it. She lived the dream. But as so often happens with dreams, the reality was more complicated and messy and even scary, and all the more beautiful for it. Today on the podcast, I am honored to be joined by the great Vashti Bunyan to talk about that incredible adventure, the album that was born out of it, and where her journey has taken her since. Here's Vashti Bunyan. How was your train ride?
Slow. The last bit, when it's dark, between Newcastle and Edinburgh seems to take forever, but I'm very pleased to be home.
How do you occupy yourself on the train? Are you a reader, a listener to music or podcasts, or do you just stare out the window and contemplate?
Looking at my phone and reading the news and getting desperate and then playing a game of Scrabble and just getting through the time.
Well, it sounds like a beautiful way to spend a journey. I miss taking the train. And as I said, I'm so grateful that you would get off the train and immediately come to your computer to speak to us.
Oh, well, you're welcome. You're welcome.
By way of jumping into it, I was wondering how, if you can cast your mind back, you first began writing songs, how you learned how to do it.
Goodness. I was a student at art school and I shared the top floor of a building in Oxford with a girl called Jenny Lewis who had a guitar. She also had a book by Bert Whedon called Play in a Day. And I know that a few other people from my era learned to play guitar with that book. It was just wonderful. It was so simply put out and so useful. And I managed to learn quite quickly. So did Jenny. And we started writing songs together and apart. And I don't know, we were just trying to write songs that meant a little more than the pop songs that we had been listening to. And I think we both succeeded. The songs that we both wrote at that time, I really value, and I'm really proud of us. You know, we were 17, 18, and I was bored with painting and drawing, and I found my guitar much more fascinating, really fascinating.
Do you remember the first song you wrote?
I do. It's called I Don't Know What Love Is, which is about right for a 17, 18-year-old, yeah.
That's an awful lot more honest than I think a lot of first songs might be.
Oh, right, yeah.
I was never more confident that I knew what love was than when I was 17 or 18. I was wrong, of course, but I was pretty sure of myself.
Of course. Of course.
How long were you writing songs and honing your craft, if you will, before you started trying to break into the music business or take it outdoors and into the offices or what have you?
Well, I was asked to leave the art school after 2 years because I didn't turn up to classes, and I was much more interested in writing songs or painting scenery for the university drama groups or things like that, just anything rather than sit in front of a drawing for 3 weeks. It was a very traditional art school, and I got bored very quickly. So I was asked to leave. I was sent to New York by my parents to look after my sister's children. And that's where I discovered the freewheeling Bob Dylan in a shop window. And I bought it and listened to it, and it changed my life completely. I think I had had a very sheltered upbringing, post-war upbringing. I think parents of my parents' generation wanted to protect us from the realities of war.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't know very much. And Bob Dylan's album opened my mind a lot. It also made me want to write better songs. I wanted to be a wandering musician with a guitar over my back. And I came back to the UK. And by a series of incredible coincidences, I met Andrew Loog Oldham, who was the manager of the Rolling Stones. I think I was 19. He was 20, nearly 21, and had massive success.
My God.
And I wanted to record my own songs, but he gave me a Stones song to have as my first single. I was outraged. I didn't want a Stones song. I wanted my songs. And he put one of mine on the B-side, which was good. But anyway, I didn't succeed. What I wanted before I met Andrew was to bring quiet acoustic music into mainstream pop. And the single I made with Andrew had a 32-piece orchestra. And I loved it. I loved that time. But because it didn't work, my second single was just with a guitar and a double bass. And that didn't work either. Several times I really tried to bring something more simple into pop music charts. And I felt like I had failed, terribly failed.
Was there a song of yours in particular at the time that you felt was the one that ought to work, that in your mind was the song that was going to cross that divide?
Yes, there was. And it was a song called I'd Like to Walk Around in Your Mind.
I'd like to walk around in your mind someday. I'd like to walk all over the things you say to me.
It was about a real person. And I did record it for Andrew Oldham, but it was never released. And I lost it.
Yes, it vanished.
It vanished. Well, it was only on an acetate demo. That's all I had. And I'd given it away to somebody. And I didn't hear it again for 20-something years.
You see the end before the beginning has ever begun.
And then it sort of miraculously resurfaced.
It did. It appeared on a collection by somebody called Paul Smee of pop psych obscurities. And he didn't know who had written it. He had somehow gotten a hold of one of these demos and put it in his collection. And I was alerted to that by somebody in Sacramento. And he said, "Do you know that this is still out there? And everything you did was still out there." And so to hear it again was magical, really magical.
I'd sing my songs and find out just what they mean to you.
I can only imagine. And I want to get to all of that resurfacing because that's not the only one of your records that resurfaced. But I was really curious what it was like being in a recording session, making some things just stick in your mind and I Want to Be Alone. And I listen to those records now and they have a sound that I recognize as, being, as you say, of the time and with lushly orchestrated and all that. And I've never been anywhere near a session that's anything like that. And I would love to hear any memories you have of just what it was like to be physically sitting in that room, standing in that studio, experiencing it, because it seems like a really incredible thing.
It was incredible. It was incredible. And the studio that we recorded those 2 tracks in was not terribly big. And it took 2 sessions with different musicians to get it all on tape. And my best memory, and it's really clear, is 3 trombones who really didn't have room. It was wonderful. It was so different to anything I'd ever experienced. Jimmy Page on guitar and Big Jim Sullivan and Nicky Hopkins on piano. And then all these trumpets it was incredible. But the thing was, I didn't have any say in any of it because I was just a singer. And I don't think I even went up into where all the controls were. I was just in a glass box singing. And that was it. And then I had to go away. I think people don't understand how little control singers or any kind of artist had at that time. That, the producer was God.
Yeah.
And I couldn't put any ideas in at all. Not to Some Things Just Stick in Your Mind. But with the B-side, I Want to Be Alone, which was my song, I worked out the arrangement with David Whittaker sitting at his piano. And that again, was a wonderful, wonderful experience. To have somebody else work on my song was just great. Yeah, I have very, very clear memories of those times. But I'm furious with myself for not making more of it, for not making friends with people. I was too shy. I just, I didn't speak to anybody. And that I think, if only I'd been a different kind of person, things could have been very different for me. But I wasn't.
And ain't that the way of making art? You look back and realize how much, I thought that I had the song and I had the voice, and so it should all fall into place. And then, I should have managed my relationships differently, or if only
Yes.
I'd been a different kind of person, which is, I suppose that's regret.
If only I'd been a different kind of person. You're right. And I think that all the time.
It seems to be commonly agreed now. I think, if I'm not mistaken, even Andrew Loog Oldham himself has admitted that I Want to Be Alone is the superior song of those 2. Did you suspect this at the time? Did you know in your mind that you were, it should have been flipped? The A side should have been the B side and vice versa?
Absolutely. Yes, I really did. I really did genuinely think it was the more catchy tune, that it could have caught people much more than Some Things Just Stick in Your Mind. It had more life in it, I think. Although I love Some Things Just Stick in Your Mind now. I think it's a wonderful song. But at the time, I got into trouble because on a radio show, I said I thought that I wrote better songs than Mick Jagger. I meant the me. But I got in big trouble about that.
That was your bigger than Jesus moment.
Yeah.
It's always amazing to me how much the music industry adores finding a singer, a songwriter who has a unique voice, bringing them in because of that voice, and then immediately setting about erasing all traces of the uniqueness and individuality of that voice in favor of, making you into the next Marianne Faithfull or whatever some genius in a boardroom decided you were going to be.
Yeah, and I didn't know. I was too stupid to understand that was what was happening to me, and the press that was written about me. And oh dear, it was quite upsetting. And I understand now why so many people fall by the wayside, because it's just too difficult to be somebody who starts out really confident and knowing that what you're doing is good. And then it gets changed completely, and you're presented as somebody that you don't even recognize, and it does happen still to young people. But then it was,
Oh my God, absolutely. And to young women still more than anyone else.
Well, I don't know, back in I think in the early 60s into the mid 60s, there were an awful lot of young boys who got ruined because they were just taken up by people who wanted to make them into something else. And they just lost themselves. And it did happen to boys as much as to girls then. And I had to try and say that sometimes, that it wasn't just the girls.
No, anyone they think they can make a buck off is
Yes.
subject to some version of it. And you do, that changes your compass, because you know that you want to create music. And then they say, well, this is the kind of music it takes, so create this.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it doesn't work out, you're left feeling like you've failed somehow, as you described it, even though nothing that happened was really by your design, or very little of it.
Yeah. Well, I do like to think that of myself, that actually, but like I said before, when I look back, I think there were lots of things that I could have done differently, but I just didn't know.
Described that way, it's perhaps not shocking that it wasn't terribly long between when you did those first sessions and when you were literally hitching up a wagon and getting out of Dodge. Can you talk me through the sort of the journey from that first studio session in that little London studio with trombone slides bashing into each other to you and Bess and the gang hitting the road?
Well, it was quite a long, convoluted story, but yeah, I gave up. I gave up on music altogether. I'm never setting foot in a studio ever again. It's too destructive, really. Although I couldn't think that at the time, that it was destructive, that I was being destroyed by it. And I met an art student who had very similar ideas to me about how the world was going and how we couldn't cope with it, and we wanted to make our own world. And we made a little home in a wood behind his art school. We made a little house under a rhododendron bush. And it was magical. It was wonderful. But then somebody from the Bank of England came along and said, "This is our ground, off you go." And so we had to. And on the way out, my partner at the time, Robert, said, "What we really need is a house on wheels so that we can just go anywhere we want." And at that moment, we found an old wagon, and it belonged to a traveler guy who gave us, well, he didn't give us, he sold us a horse called Bess and a little wagon. It was an old baker's delivery cart.
Aha.
And before that, we had met Donovan, the singer. His friends were at art school with Robert. And he had just bought some islands off the west coast of Scotland, where he wanted to create a sort of, not a community, but just what he called a renaissance of poets and writers and artists and singers in this bit of ground that he'd bought that had a whole lot of ruined houses on it. And that seemed like such a wonderful, wonderful dream, you know? And he lent us the money for horse, cart, and harness. We took off from south of London, headed for 600 miles away. Donovan went in his Land Rover. By the time we got to the promised land, Donovan himself wasn't there, and it hadn't happened because it took us over a year to get there. You know, people change in a year.
Yes, they do.
We changed in a year on the road. But yes, I wrote songs. Robert wrote some of the words of the songs, and I wrote all the music. And we had met Joe Boyd halfway through the journey, and he wanted to make an album. And I thought, I'm never setting foot in a studio ever again. But he did persuade me to record those songs as a kind of document of the journey. So we did at the end of 1969. And it didn't come out till the end of 1970, by which time things had changed so much that nobody was interested in such a gentle piece of music by 1970 into 71. So, you know, it missed its window, really. And I gave up again.
Did you set out on the journey expecting or intending to write songs? I mean, evidently you brought your guitar.
I had written a song while we were living in the wood. I had my little guitar with me, and I took the guitar with me on the road. And in a way, those songs came about from trying to make something something beautiful out of a really difficult time. Being on the road in the mud, in the rain, and I missed my parents. I missed everything that I'd left behind so completely. But it was a way of comforting and keeping going.
Jog along Bess, hop along May, squeak along Blue, it's a walk along day. It's a long road and weary are we. Bubble on kettle and make us all some tea.
A song like Jog Along Bess, I wrote in the rain. It's the happiest song on the album, but I wrote it at a time when things were really hard. And that's what I kind of love about it now.
One day we took her away, painted her wagon bright and gay. Now she finds she's traveling north, no more wandering back and forth.
It's a beautiful song. I was going to ask about that one specifically because I'm so curious what your relationship with Bess was like. Not least, I mean, it sounds like you really came to rely on her and she taught you a lot, but also from a creative perspective. I've had pets and animal friends in my life who have just in the listening to you playing seem to impact how the music comes out of you. And I wanted to ask if it was like that with you and Bess.
Oh, yes. We had 2 dogs and a horse with us. And Bess, she was quite elderly and we didn't know at the time how old she was, but she was a wise old thing. And she became the real focus of our lives because we did, of course, rely on her because she was taking us where we wanted to go. And we had to look after her. And, at the beginning of the journey, looking back, I know how ill I was, really. But having to look after a horse and find wood for the fire and find water for everybody and just keep it all together made me better, made me connect to the world again instead of taking off into some kind of craziness. And yeah, she was the mainstay of all of it. She was a wonderful creature. And I used to talk to her and she listened. She was more than the dogs were, although I loved the dogs as well, but she was the one. Yeah. She threw me off once.
She threw you off once?
I had to ride her to a blacksmith when I'd never ridden a horse in my life. Bareback. I had to take her to the blacksmith. She was going along the road and then there was a piece of white paper at the side of the road which blew and she shied from this frightening piece of paper and I fell off. Well, that was a good introduction to a horse. Yeah. Okay. She threw me off.
Indeed. Also, what a sentence to say, I had to ride the horse to the blacksmith. That was one of the last moments in history that such an errand would really be necessary.
Yes.
Would you pass other people on horses as you were on your journeys? Were there the occasional other, horsebound traveler?
People, not other travelers. No. The travelers thought that we were crazy to be going back to a horse. They all had cars.
I think a lot of people probably dream or fantasize of doing that. And you are acquainted with the reality of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to use the word magical, but it did have some magical times where being on the road, when you think that you're so vulnerable and that it's also dangerous with great big trucks rushing by you and the police after you all the time. But when you're out like that in the middle of nowhere with no real support, fantastic things can happen. And it got to the point where I expected them to. I expected it all to be fine and okay, and we'll get there.
That's quite a beautiful feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was, yes.
So in the midst of all this, I'm so curious about how you were writing the songs. I mean, were you trundling through the field with the guitar on your lap playing and singing? Were the songs running on a loop? A lot of the songs sound to me quite sung. They sound like you would sing them to yourself or to Bess or to the dogs as you go over and over, and that maybe they came out of something like that.
I think, whenever we stopped, I would have my guitar with me and sometimes I played it, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes a song would come. I didn't set out to write songs. Well, actually, it was Robert. Robert said to me, why don't you stop writing these miserable little love songs and start writing about all the world around you. And so that's what I did. I did stop writing miserable little love songs. I came back to it later, 30 years later. But at the time, I think that's what I was trying to do, was to try and make these beautiful pictures out of a rather grey landscape. But at some points, I felt really, really lucky, like when I was writing Rose Hit November or Swallow Song.
And there's a swallow teaching its young how to fly.
We were in a house that these wonderful people had lent us for the winter, and I just felt so lucky. And those songs are about feeling fortunate, really, and seeing the world as beautiful, where I hadn't before. So yeah, I'm grateful for that.
You talked about making your own world, and I hear in the songs a glimpse of that world. You got to get water and food for the horse. You need wood for the fire. These are elemental concerns, and it seems that that's reflected in the music.
Oh, yes, I think so. I think that was what was really capturing my imagination, was being able to live without electricity, without running water, just to live in a world as it is and to find what we needed within it. Because, it's been made into my kind of identity, but actually it was only a couple of years.
Yes. And you didn't mean it as any kind of great statement, as I understand.
I really didn't. I wouldn't have been smart enough to do that. I just did what I had to do.
But of course, this is the music industry in another way, sort of narrativizing. So I understand the horse and carriage rider. I know her.
That's right. That's right. It was only a little bit of my life, but of course it has influenced the rest of my life completely.
So at the end of this great long journey, you then returned to London to make the record, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I had met Joe Boyd halfway through the journey. And by the end of the journey, he got in contact to say, have you written all the songs now to make an album? If you've got all the songs, I will book a studio and bring you down to London. And we did that in 3 days. We recorded the album. And I think when I had met Joe, the songs that I probably sang him were something like Diamond Day.
Just another diamond day, just a blade of grass, just another bale of hay, and the horses pass.
But not Jog Along Bess, and not the ones with the animals in. So he was slightly taken aback when he had to listen to Jog Along Bess. That wasn't his idea at all, to have a record about animals. But he was really great, and he went along with it and recorded it all in 3 nights. And I had just discovered that I was pregnant, and Robert and I went back to the Hebrides and forgot all about the music. And I never wrote another song.
Was the recording sessions for Just Another Diamond Day, was that your first return to the city since you'd left it?
No, it wasn't. My return was halfway through the journey when my mother was ill and she died. And so I returned at that time. Not a happy one.
Not a happy one, no, but perhaps one that would lessen the culture shock of returning to urban life all of a sudden out of the wilds.
Yeah. Yes. I remember, because we didn't have a mirror with us. And I remember when I came back to London to record the album, we were staying with a friend and there was a mirror in the bathroom. That's not me. That's not me. I look strong and healthy. And when I'd left, I was a small, skinny, pale being. And there I was. It had made me strong, and it was an extraordinary feeling.
What a beautiful experience. And to not have a mirror, to not be able to see yourself for a while alone is so alien to me. You know, I see myself, I'm looking at myself right now on a computer screen for my sins.
I know. It's amazing, isn't it? An amazing thought that we didn't even think to have them.
Were the recording sessions for Diamond Day, did they feel different than the earlier ones? Did you get a little more say in what was going on? Did you get to go into the control room and see the faders and the buttons blinking and whizzing?
I did get to go in and see the faders and the buttons and all of those things that I so wanted to get my hands on. And yes, it was very different because Joe was very different. It's hard to describe the difference in him, because even now he says to me, you know, why didn't you say what you wanted? Why did you let me just do what I wanted and it wasn't what you wanted? Why did you let me? And I said, well, yeah, you know, that's the way I was. But even so, it was just friendlier, softer, lovely, really lovely. The other musicians were incredible. It didn't turn out the way I wanted it, but I didn't say how I wanted it, so it's my fault.
How did you want it?
Well, how did I want it? It's easier to say how I didn't want it.
I know that feeling well, as do most producers, I suspect, yes.
Yes. I didn't want it to sound so folky. Robert Kirby had arranged 3 of the songs with violins and recorders, and that was what I felt it needed, a much more of a classical kind of feel to it. And he did it perfectly. And then Joe brought in Dave Swarbrick and Simon Nicol from Fairport Convention and Robin Williamson from the Incredible String Band. Now, I'd been on the road. I didn't know who these people were. If I'd known, then maybe I'd have said, maybe that's not quite the right people, but we carried on with it. And the songs that they did, I love them now. But at the time, I felt that they weren't what I wanted. That I think I've said it before, that it was as if it was Joe's portrait of me. And when I actually saw the end result, I didn't recognize myself. And Joe has said recently, well, I know that it's my fault that you're being called a folk singer, but, you know, I did come to visit you in that winter. Was halfway through the journey. He said, you were living the most folky life of anybody I'd ever met. So, of course, I thought that's what you were. And he's apologized for it, but it was who was around then and who was around Joe. And I have, of course, forgiven him and forgiven myself and forgiven everybody else who was involved in it. It was very difficult that nobody understood it when it was released. And it wasn't really released. It just sort of wandered out the end of 1970. And now when I think about those sessions, some of it was really magical and joyful. And some of it was not sure about this, but I didn't say. And I'm kind of glad I didn't. It's as if it made itself from the time, from the people around. It's itself. And I'm kind of glad I didn't try and mess it up.
Well, as a portrait of you, I think it is quite a flattering one for what it's worth.
Thank you.
As you say, the record comes out and is not met with a storm of enthusiasm, regrettably. And by the time it comes out, you've already returned north and you've basically washed your hands of the music business.
Like I said, I never wrote another song after that. I didn't need to. I had my child. And so, yeah, the songs stopped coming.
So over the ensuing decades, I read you talking about Googling or searching your name on the internet and finding someone's post on a message board about the album and you emailed them. Is that really how it all started up again?
That's how it came back. Yes, I in the intervening years, I had nothing to do with music. So I never knew what was happening to any of it. And I just thought it had all disappeared. But yes, I got a computer in about 96 and it was pre-Google. It was Alta Vista.
Oh, good old Alta Vista.
Yes. And I put my name into it, not expecting to see anything. And up came all these references to Diamond Day and other recordings. And yes, there was a message on the Incredible String Band board, I think it was, saying, does anybody know what happened to this person? And I wrote back to him. And he had bought Diamond Day in Sacramento in 1970. And he told me about all these other things. He told me about I'd Like to Walk Around in Your Mind is around, and that Diamond Day, people liked it, loved it. And it was still in existence. And I had no idea until he told me that it was still there.
And so how quickly after that did the notion of stepping back into the game arise? And was it a difficult decision?
It was kind of slow. But, from when I did find that message on the board and found that person, and he sent me in the direction of looking more, I got a call from someone called Paul Lambden, who was working for Wright at the time, and he'd found the old publishing contracts. And he wanted to know what it referred to. And I said, and he said, well, I'd really like to hear it. So I didn't have a copy of the album. I'd given them all away years ago.
Wow.
And I knew someone who had one. I got him to make a tape for me. I sent it to Paul. Paul called me and he said, I like it. Nobody ever had ever said that to me before. And he said that he'd really like to try putting it out on CD. And that was such a dream to me, that we had to get the rights back and everything. And it took ages and ages and ages and ages, but we did it. It came out in 2000. And the response to it was, 30 years later, it was completely different. Different people, different attitudes. People seemed kinder in a way. And a lot of young people who were the age that I was when I made this album, who understood it for what it was. It wasn't nursery rhymes for children. It wasn't daft. It was all right. And these incredible young people, they were sort of acting as advocates really for me and for the album. And it came out in America, and I got asked to do some live shows, and I'd never done that, But one thing led to another, and I did do some live shows, and it was wonderful, amazing to be playing with other people for a start, because I never had, and to have people enjoy the songs was lovely. And that led me to being able to pick up my guitar again, and the songs started coming through. It also coincided with my last child, who I'd had when I was 41. Once he left home, that was when I started writing again. So from when I first knew I was pregnant and didn't write anything at all, to when my last kid left home, I didn't write anything, and then suddenly it all started.
Do you think solitude is important to your creative process then?
Oh, yes. Because when I've been recording myself at home, if I know that there's somebody else in the house, I listen to the vocal that I put down compared to the vocal when there's nobody in the house. It's much stronger. There's something about, somebody might hear me.
I know.
It's really extraordinary.
I was really interested reading you talk about demos versus the recorded versions of your music. And I know there's an expanded version of Look Aftering coming next year. And I listened, there's one demo that's out on Bandcamp now, and I listened to it in comparison. And you can hear, even though it's very, it's recognizably the same song, a similar arrangement, there's something in it. And obviously you learned how to self-produce to make Heartleap.
Yes, sort of. Yes, I did. Oh, yes.
What did you do it with? What kind of computer stuff are we working with here?
I had Pro Tools on one laptop here. I had Logic on one laptop here. And I had a little Air on a stool with which I contacted people to say, oh, no, what do I do now? How do I get out of this mess? And so I had these 3 laptops that helped me do it, because there were things in Pro Tools that I knew how to do, things in Logic that I knew how to do. And so I had to keep going between them. And I had a great time. Really, it took me a long time.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to learn. There's so much I have no idea about. But that demo that you're talking about is called If I Were. And that was the very first one.
Oh, wow.
With the first royalties from Diamond Day, I bought a Mac and I bought a little mixer and a microphone in it that I needed and a little keyboard. And that was the first recording I did, the first song I wrote and the first recording I did.
I mean, what a magical thing to have that documented. It's so immediate. It's so raw. It's right out of your brain through your fingers onto the ones and the zeros.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved that. And people say, well, how can you use fake instruments? They're not fake. They're ideas that are coming from my head. They're not imposing themselves on me. I'm using them to make the sounds I want to make. And I loved doing that. I really enjoyed doing that for the last album. I think that's another thing. People think that I'm this folk singer who should be doing everything acoustically and keeping it pure. I just don't. I much prefer to be fooling around with a synthesizer,
You've talked a lot about how you chafe against that folk singer label.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear, especially in the Diamond Day music, there's that meditative almost quality, that sung quality. They sound like songs that might have been kept alive by performance and by oral tradition, but they weren't. They were kept alive on record, just like the acetate kept that song alive. And which is very pop music, to have a record of something that keeps it alive rather than, there wasn't 30 Pete Seeger singing Jog Along Bess, keeping it safe for you over the years. There was just however many copies of Diamond Day were floating around out there in Sacramento and wherever else.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think I said in my book that it was like an orphan child, that Diamond Day was just another Diamond Day. It's like an orphan child that came back to find me. And I didn't look for it. I didn't have anything to do with it for all those years. But I'm so glad that it did come back to find me.
Was there a moment as it was resurfacing, as you were re-engaging, where you sat down and listened to the record for the first time since however long?
Yes, that was when we went into a studio to remaster it, me and Paul Lambden. And I think because I'd never really heard it on anything but a scratchy old record player or an old tape or whatever. And anyway, I wouldn't let my children hear it even, it was gone. We went into the studio with the master tape. We'd panned the master tape, which was a miracle in itself, and took it into a studio. And when I heard it through these big speakers, that was when I realized what Joe had done and how beautifully he had produced it. And it was an absolute blow-away moment when I heard it for the first time as it should have been heard. And I always thought how that bit of trumpet that Robert Kirby did on the end of Timothy Crumb, dear goodness, that always makes me go, oh no. And Paul said, that's the bit I love most. So I thought, I suppose it is. Yeah. Oh, it is lovely, isn't it? I'm not proud of that part of me that has to have somebody else say, I like it. And then I listen again and think, oh, okay.
It reminds me a bit of what you said of turning up in London after having been on the cart, not with a mirror, and looking at yourself in a mirror for the first time and seeing someone completely different. It must have felt a bit like that.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Really different. And yes, it turned my life around completely. Gave me another musical life, which I hadn't expected at all.
Yeah, the music industry needed a few decades to catch up to your notion that gentle, beautiful music could be mainstream or could find an audience.
It could find an audience, yes. Yeah, and the audience itself had changed so much in the years.
And of course, notably, it came through fellow musicians and music lovers as opposed to, boardroom suits and business experts.
Yeah, producers. Yeah. Yeah, I think, yes, the role of the producer has changed so much with people being able to do this stuff for themselves in their bedrooms or in their, wherever. Producer is not quite the same anymore.
No.
And I think that's probably a good thing.
I've been doing music for just shy of 20 years professionally. And the whole time I've been doing it, there's at least been lip service paid to the notion that the artist is paramount. The artist comes in, the artist has the songs, and they still mess with you and they still change it all and they still think they know best, but they're compelled at least to sort of pretend to respect your vision at least and to let you come into the control room and have your say, even if they ultimately veto it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can have your say and then a little bit later you'll listen to it again and say, oh, I didn't want that bit. But I think, like with anybody who makes anything, you look at it or you hear it and you think, oh, I wish I could do that again, or I wish I'd carried on, or I wish I hadn't let that happen. And I think, when I listen to everything I've done, I think, I would really like to do that again. But then, especially with the last one, Heartleap, I had to stop somewhere because I could have gone on. I'm sure you know this, that you just, where do you stop?
Oh, a wise person once said to me, a record is never finished, it's only released.
That's so completely right. Quite right.
And that's why they call it a record. It's a record of where you were in a particular moment. And even if you were, not where you thought you ought to be, or even if you regret where you were when you made those decisions or allowed someone else to make those decisions, ultimately, you must know better than anyone, taking 30 years away from a record and then re-embracing it, that's the record.
That's it.
That's the portrait.
That's it. That's it. And cannot be changed. And yes, I think, yes, Joe and I were talking about it not long ago. That's it. Can't change it. It's there. And, it's got its own life. And yeah, how lucky I am.
Did writing your book change how you looked at all of this? I mean, you wrote it after having made your 3 records. And so you got to look at everything as one story. I did.
Well, I had been writing bits and pieces of it for quite a long time. I did write some in about 93, 94. And I sent it off to various publishers, got nothing back. And I thought, oh, well, that's no good then. Mm-hmm. But then when I came to actually seriously getting down to writing it, I did have all of that as well to refer to. And I have very, very clear memories. And it was great. It was a bit like painting, actually, to write those stories and to put it all down. I really enjoyed that. I didn't enjoy the editing process because, again, somebody would want to change the language or say, no, you can't put it like that, or no, that word doesn't exist.
Yes. Yes, everybody knowing best around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad I did it. I would have liked to have written more, but there's so much that's missed out. And I will write about it again one day.
I was going to ask if you'd ever write another book.
I would really love to. There was a bit that I referred to in the book about the year in Ireland in 1970-71, which was an extraordinary year. Again, traveling with horses and dogs and people and chickens. And I would like to write that one just as that year. And I have started it and I do keep going back to it. Whether I'll ever finish it or not, I don't know. But I am trying to.
And there's something to be said for getting it out and going through that process, whatever becomes of it.
Exactly. Yes, whatever becomes of it.
And on that note, and I'm not trying to pry or invade your privacy at all, but I wonder, you were talking about playing the synthesizer, and I know as a home recording enthusiast myself, for every song I have recorded or every demo, I have dozens of ideas, sketches, loops, little sound forests that I was briefly very excited by. And I was curious if you still dabble just for your own pleasure.
I haven't for a while, but certainly when I was making Heartleap, I had some words written up on a little thing by a speaker. And I thought, well, that's quite good. And in my cupboard was an old black Mac laptop that was ages old. And I knew there was a tune in there that I had to find. And yeah, it was there. And I put that with the words, and that became a song called Blue Shed. And I think yes, there are things still stuck away that I could maybe go and look back on and find something else in. But really, I should be making new. No, I don't like that word should. It will happen or it won't.
It will happen or it won't. And that's the tyranny of recorded media as well, is that pressure to do something with all of it. Whereas in the past, you would have just forgotten 20 of those ideas.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think that's really scary when you set about trying to put something down. You think, how do I keep this? I must keep this. I must keep this. I must record it as I go along because it'll be lost. And yeah, I do lose things.
I used to, if I was out walking around and having a whistle or having a hum or just sort of entertaining myself with a melody as I often do, I would feel compelled to sing it into my phone or to rush home to get it down or to make sure I didn't forget. And it was a real watershed moment for me one day when I thought, if I'm just out and about and I'm just making music into the world for my own amusement, that's where it stays. And if I remember it, great, but I'm not going to run home and try and write it down. I'm not going to take every piece of music that comes into my mind and treat it as a potential part of my job. And so I'm sure I've lost track of a number of potentially very usable melodies, but it feels like a sacrifice to the gods of music,
Well, they can have it.
They can have it. They need it more than I do anyway. To loop back around to the beginning by way of hopefully approaching narrative conclusion, you talked about, you hitched up the wagon, you left behind a modernity, if I can say that you were feeling out of step with. And I think that a lot of people sympathize with that notion nowadays. Are people wrong to romanticize hitching up a horse and cart? Obviously, it was different than people would expect. And yet, is there some truth or salvation to be found there, do you think?
Yes. And I would not like to disabuse people of the fact that it was magical in some ways. Of course, it was muddy and I was crying for my mother a lot of the time. And also, I don't know if you could do it now. I don't know if it would be possible to do it in this world as it is. I wouldn't be happy for my kids to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what has happened recently is that my son, who has been living and married to the same person for 20 years, is now out on his own. And he has bought an Airstream, an old Airstream, and he's got an old Jeep, and he's going to take off. And I'm so proud of him. He's 54, but he's going back to maybe something that was in his childhood that he knew about, and now he's reenacting it in some kind of way. And
That's so beautiful.
I'm very proud of him.
Is he in the States?
Yes, in California.
Well, you maybe can do it a bit more in California than you can in Toronto or in New York or London.
Or in Scotland.
Or Scotland, yes. But that's part of what I like about taking the train is you at least see some parts of the country where there aren't cars or that you don't see from a car or, it's slightly off the beaten path at the very least.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Well, we always close out here on Major Label Debut by asking the most important question of all, which is, do you remember what you were eating in the studio when you were making Just Another Diamond Day?
What I was eating?
Yes. Was there a canteen?
No. I don't think there was much in the way of eating going on. No. And I really can't remember. The people that I was staying with, I had probably made some kind of lentil stew. We lived on brown rice and lentils and onions. So I'd probably made something like that. I don't know that they enjoyed it particularly. But anyway, it kept us going.
Well, it sounds much healthier than beer and pizza and burritos, which is what's fueled most of my studio sessions.
Nothing like that. No.
Well, I just can't thank you enough. I've loved your music so much for so long.
No,
I feel
thank
so
you.
lucky and humbled. And I'm just, for what it's worth, I'm so glad that your music lived and lives and that you get to be part of the celebration of it belatedly, perhaps differently than you initially expected, but to say it's deserved is an understatement. And I really hope that you feel the love and that, you know how much it means to people.
Thank you. You're very kind. And, that this kindness that has come towards me, I could never have imagined. And I am the most lucky person. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's richly deserved. And we're all lucky to have this incredible, special music to cherish and to live with forever. And I'll continue humming and singing and whistling and listening to the records and sharing them with everyone I love.
Thank you. And make your own melodies, whether it's for the gods or for you or for us. Please keep going.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Bye-bye.
That's the inimitable Vashti Bunyan. She is a great artist, and not to get too grandiose, but I think a true seer and someone whose music just seems to me to resonate at like the frequency of the universe. Honestly, I was a bit trepidatious about this whole episode. Just Another Diamond Day has been a really special record in my life for a really long time. It's an album that I genuinely consider to be mystical, and so demystifying it is kind of intimidating. But of course, as you just heard, I needn't have worried. If anything, the album and all of Vashti's work just seems even more magical to me now. So I'm just incredibly grateful to have had this audience with Vashti. Like I said, I just felt humbled to be in the presence of this wonderful artist and to hear about her journey and her life and to bask in these amazing songs that I love so much. And needless to say, I would strongly encourage you to bask in them as well. All 3 of her studio records are amazing, and so is Some Things Just Stick in Your Mind, which is the compilation of the music she was working on before she set out on her horse adventure. It's an incredible body of work, and it's thrilling and fascinating and incredible to listen to this really singular voice evolve over not just years, but like decades and chapters of life. And the 20th anniversary version of her album, Look Aftering, is out now. So if you want to hear some of the demos we were talking about, you can do so that way. So thanks again to Vashti for being so generous with her time and for the conversation and, of course, most importantly, for the music. And thank you for listening to Major Label Debut. Just a note, you heard us talk a bit about the great Marianne Faithfull. We had our conversation before Marianne Faithfull's death, so we didn't get a chance to pay tribute. But of course, we salute Marianne Faithfull. Her art will live forever. Major Label Debut is produced by John Paul Bullock and Josh Hook, and our theme song is by Mr. Greg Alsop. We sell t-shirts and mugs on our website, majorlabeldebut.com, and you know we are on all the socials media. That is the end of this episode, but Major Label Debut will return with more tales from the intersection of art and commerce.